What if I told you one of the world's largest empires wasn't forged in a massive invasion, but in a single pivotal battle? A battle decided as much by treachery and rain as by sheer military might. This is the story of the Battle of Plassey in 1757. A showdown that saw a few thousand company soldiers defeat an army of 50,000. In doing so, it laid the foundation for 2 centuries of British rule in India. It's a wild story of how a trading enterprise, the British East India Company, morphed into a ruling power, and how a conspiracy in a wealthy Indian court changed the world forever. This wasn't just a battle, it was the moment an empire was born from chaos, ambition, and betrayal. The spark in a powder keg. Let's set the scene. We're in Bengal, the wealthiest province of the declining Mughal Empire. For the British East India Company, Bengal was a gold mine, a hub of lucrative trade that fueled its massive ambitions. But this wasn't just a business anymore, it was starting to look a lot like a military power. They were building up fortifications at their base in Calcutta, a move that definitely didn't go unnoticed. In April 1756, a new ruler, the young and fiercely independent Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah, took the throne of Bengal. At just 23, he was tired of the growing European influence in his territory. He saw the new British walls not as a defense against their French rivals, but as a direct challenge to his authority. So, he ordered them to stop. They refused. In response, Siraj-ud-Daulah did something few Indian rulers dared. He gathered an army of 50,000, marched on Calcutta, and the city's weak defenses at Fort William fell in June 1756. What happened next became a rallying cry for British revenge, the infamous Black Hole of Calcutta. Surviving British defenders were allegedly crammed into a tiny, airless dungeon overnight, where many died from suffocation and heat exhaustion. While modern historians debate the exact number of casualties and suggest the story was exaggerated for propaganda, the British weaponized it as the perfect justification for what was coming. News reached the company's headquarters in Madras, and they sent their most ruthless and ambitious commander, Robert Clive, to get Calcutta back and restore British honor. The conspiracy. Robert Clive was a master strategist, but he wasn't a fool. He knew that taking on the Nawab's massive army head-on was a long shot, even with his experienced troops. The odds were just not in his favor. This victory wouldn't be won with cannons and muskets alone. It would be won in the shadows, with whispers and promises. Clive started poking at the deep divisions within the Nawab's own court. Siraj-ud-Daulah, for all his power, had made some powerful enemies. Key figures, like the hugely influential Jagat Seth banking family, were terrified the young Nawab would seize their immense wealth. But the biggest prize for Clive was a man named Mir Jafar, the commander-in-chief of the Nawab's army and Siraj's own great-uncle. Disgruntled and ambitious, Mir Jafar secretly wanted the throne of Bengal for himself. Through a web of intermediaries, Clive and Mir Jafar struck a devastating secret deal. If Mir Jafar made sure his large chunk of the army sat out the fight, the British would make him the new Nawab of Bengal once Siraj-ud-Daulah was out of the picture. Other key commanders like Rai Durlab were also pulled into the conspiracy. A trap was being laid. The battle was set to be a charade, a public performance to legitimize a coup. Clive wasn't just planning a battle, he was orchestrating regime change. The Day of Destiny. On June 23, 1757, the two armies faced off on the swampy plains near the village of Plassey. The scene must have been terrifying for the British. The Nawab's army of nearly 50,000 soldiers, with cannons drawn by oxen and elephants, formed a huge crescent, threatening to swallow Clive's tiny force of just over 3,000 men. The British hunkered down in a dense mango grove, their backs to the river, looking completely cornered. The battle kicked off with an artillery duel. The Nawab's cannons roared, but their aim was poor, and the shots were mostly useless. For hours, it was a stalemate. And then the sky opened up. A torrential monsoon rain drenched the battlefield. This is where a little preparation made all the difference. The disciplined British troops had brought tarpaulins and quickly covered their gunpowder, keeping it perfectly dry. The Nawab's forces, disorganized and unprepared, didn't. Their massive stockpile of gunpowder was soaked through, rendered completely useless. Just like that, an 18th century army's most powerful weapon was silenced by rain. The Betrayal. When the rain let up, the Nawab's cavalry charged, thinking the British cannons were as useless as their own. They were met with a shocking storm of disciplined fire from Clive's dry cannons, which tore through their ranks and sent them scrambling back in confusion. In the chaos, one of the Nawab's few loyal and effective generals, Mir Khan, was killed by a cannonball. Panic erupted in the Nawab's command. Siraj-ud-Daulah, seeing his trusted general fall and his army in disarray, lost his nerve. He turned desperately to the one man he thought could save him, Mir Jafar. He reportedly threw his turban at Mir Jafar's feet, begging for his loyalty. Mir Jafar, the architect of this very disaster, advised the Nawab to pull his army back for the day, promising they could regroup and fight tomorrow. It was the final, devastating act of betrayal. Siraj-ud-Daulah gave the order to retreat. For the conspirators in his army, this was the signal they'd been waiting for. They held their ground, refusing to fight, and left their leader totally exposed. For Clive, seeing the enemy army crumbling from within, this was the moment. He ordered a full-scale advance straight into the heart of the demoralized and leaderless force. The Nawab's massive army, crippled by betrayal and confusion, simply melted away. Realizing he'd been had, Siraj-ud-Daulah fled the battlefield. The bitter harvest. The battle, if you can even call it that, was over. The British suffered fewer than 100 casualties. A few days later, Siraj-ud-Daulah was captured and executed, not by Mir Jafar's son, but by an officer named Muhammad Ali Beg acting on his orders. As promised, Robert Clive made Mir Jafar the new Nawab of Bengal. But this throne came at a staggering price. He was a puppet ruler, completely dependent on the British East India Company. To reward his backers, he was forced to pay out enormous sums to the company and its officials, bleeding his own kingdom dry. This period is often called the Plassey plunder, as the immense wealth of Bengal was systematically drained to fund British ambitions. Mir Jafar's name wouldn't be remembered as a king, but as the ultimate word for traitor in India, a legacy of shame that lives on today. The empire forged. The Battle of Plassey was more than just a victory. It was the single most important event that laid the groundwork for the British Raj. The company's win gave it control over India's richest province, and the endless revenues from Bengal financed the conquest of the rest of the subcontinent over the next century. It marked the moment the East India Company went from a group of merchants to a terrifying political and military power, an agent of British imperialism. The battle also crushed the ambitions of Britain's main rival, the French, in India, cementing British dominance. Plassey created a sinister new playbook for colonial expansion, not through outright conquest, but through political manipulation, conspiracy, and exploiting a nation's internal divisions. It was a victory won with bribes and deceit that handed an empire to a corporation. So, what do you think was the most decisive factor at Plassey? Was it Robert Clive's cunning strategy, that freak downpour, or Mir Jafar's devastating betrayal? Let us know in the comments below. Ultimately, Plassey was a skirmish that echoed through centuries. A conflict on a muddy field in Bengal directly led to an empire that would span the globe. It proves that history's greatest turning points aren't always grand invasions, but moments of intense personal drama, of loyalty and betrayal, ambition and despair. The battle remains a powerful symbol of colonial conquest and a cautionary tale of how a nation divided can fall.